Hello, and welcome to the Employee Safety Podcast from Alert Media, where you'll hear advice from industry leaders on how to protect your people and business. I'm Peter Steinfeld. Today, we're joined by Bruce McIndoe, a global risk advisor with decades of experience helping organizations navigate complex security and operational challenges. In this episode, we explore how the traditional operations center is evolving into a joint multidisciplinary model built to manage today's interconnected risks. Let's dive in. Hey, Bruce, thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's get right into it. You've had a very fascinating career path starting in physics and aerospace before moving into intelligence and enterprise risk. How did that journey shape the way that you think about risk and operations today?
I've been really lucky to have an interesting and, yes, eclectic career. I guess the through lines have become much clearer in hindsight than they did as I was evolving my career. So, starting in physics, I was a specialized high energy physics, astrophysics, and aerospace at NASA. I look back and say, I was trained to think in systems, whether it's unified field theory in physics or space, right? So everything is interconnected. And failure is rarely caused by a single point. So that's, I think, what I took away from having to be in a high reliability space environment. And it's usually the interaction between components is where the real risk emanates. But that mindset never left me. I moved then for 14 years into the intelligence communities at NSA, CIA. And that added a very different dimension, human complexity.
Right.
But also dealing with incomplete information and having adversarial intent, right? And making very consequential life and death situations under uncertainty, right? So that's why I developed the real appreciation for the qualitative side of risk, where things that don't show up clearly in a model, right, that you would have. These are, ethereal. And then the last half of my career now has been in enterprise risk and business continuity. And I've been bringing both of those worlds together. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But I've really come to believe that operational resilience isn't about predicting the future. It's about building organizations that can sense disruption early, adapt quickly, and recover without losing what I call their core purpose. So whether you're tracking a missile or managing, corporate crisis, the underlying discipline is remarkably similar. And I just bring all that to the table.
Well, that's fantastic. And it seems like organizations have been thinking about this for many, many years, but they've not executed on it very well. It's been a long evolutionary process to even get to where we are today. When you look at how organizations run security, continuity, and just overall crisis functions today in their organizations, what's working and what seems to be missing?
I would say what's working is that organizations have gotten much better at this structurally. The frameworks and the standards and the certifications and all of that has elevated what I call the protective disciplines. The challenge is they've all come up in their tribal silos. And instead of coming together and learning about each other, they've been very isolated, right? And again, back when I started, we didn't have dedicated security teams and business continuity and all that stuff. So all of that has matured. But what's missing is integration. And we see it more and more as quote unquote threats have converged across those domains. But even security is an overloaded word, right? Because I have physical security over here that's worried about their physical assets and protection of assets. And then we have cyber security over here looking at virtual and, network based. So, and then, business continuity on recovery and loss and emergency and crisis management focused on response and the ability to respond. So all of that is all like independent, but it is commingled. So I guess when a real event happens, ultimately all of those organizational boundaries fade away and people try to come together under difficult situations and try to get it resolved. And in most cases, they do. And that's why it's persisted over time.
Why do you think things evolved that way with this siloed approach where people got pretty good at their individual disciplines, but they didn't communicate together? They didn't work together. Why didn't they start working together and then grow in their disciplines at the same time?
I will say everything comes down to money. And in organizations, it's just like, okay, we have this issue. Leader number one, we're going to give you budget to do that issue. And then it kind of evolved. Oh, now we have to worry about cybersecurity. Okay, well, let's hire somebody that knows how to spell cybersecurity, give them a budget, and then they'll put some people together, right? So boom, 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 and everything just kind of evolves and grows up in the organization. And then you're dealing with fiefdoms and budget and how many people managers have, and it just becomes entrenched.
Yeah, it seems like the world that we live in is very reactive in the way that it develops. It's like, hey, we don't want to invest in any of this stuff if we don't have to, but oh my gosh, a hurricane just happened and it wiped out half our operations. Let's let that happen again.
Yeah,
Or
that comes on
try
that heading of don't let any disaster go to waste, right? When it comes
right.
to budget and people.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of organizations have an operations center of some kind, whether it's maybe a command center or a security operations center, a SOC, or a coordination hub of some sort. In your view, what do leaders often misunderstand about what that capability should deliver?
I guess the most common misunderstanding for essentially the lay person, whether it's senior management or the average employee, is they're viewed as like a technology investment. And leaders and the people in the company, they walk by the windows and they see screens and dashboards and data feeds that are coming in, and they equate all of that with capability. But the issue then is that those typically are themselves siloed. I go into a major Fortune 500, 200 company, they might have five different environments. They might have facility monitoring, they might have emergency EOC, they have a SOC, which is actually the cyber guys, then they have a GSOC, and they have all of that going on simultaneously operating independently, right? So that's, what I see. But this concept that we have, which is called a future operations center. And I want to repeat many times, this does not imply a physical instantiation. It could be hybrid or virtual, but it's an operating model that's going to bring this together. And what it needs to deliver at the end of the day is decision advantage for the organization. And this is coming out of that military and intelligence background, right? Because if leadership can make informed and good decisions in a timely way, but all the way down the organization, if the same goes for departments and product people and supply people and everybody, then you really have an amazing organization that's being informed by that intelligence, but also avoiding disruption or disaster by forewarning, hopefully, or if it is, then responding in a very capable way. So when I talk to leadership, for example, and maybe that's how I'll wrap this up, is we shouldn't just be managing risk. I always say, risk is the tool in the toolbox. And sometimes when I talk to leaders, I'll go in when I'm talking to them about this and said, if you were getting your HVAC system repaired, would the repairman come in and open up his toolkit and his stuff and show you all of his tools?
Hopefully not.
Not. It's going to be, it doesn't work. Tell me what's wrong, fix it, send me the bill, go home, right?
Yeah.
So risk management is a tool in our toolkit. Why are we laying that out in front of business people and leadership? Largely, they get the heat maps and the risk registers, and they see all these artifacts and they pat you on the head and say, okay, well, at least somebody's looking at this, right?
Right.
But if we came in and talked to them about what are the key value generating objectives that you have for the business, and we're going to look at each of those and say, what could cause that to not be achieved, at least in the operational domain, right? Multidisciplinary. And then we're going to mitigate that and we're going to reduce the residual risk to increase the certainty that they're going to achieve that objective. In that context, they lean forward because they now have a business context. They can now understand what might impact that achievement. So I try to tell people, quit talking about that we're in the risk management business. We're in the certainty management business.
I love that term that you used earlier of decision advantage. Because if you think about people, all we do day in and day out is make decisions. And if you can have an advantage when making your decision in a way that's going to benefit you, the organization, it's good for everybody. So that's really what these teams, the Future Operations Center, should be delivering is advantage in making decisions to everyone throughout the organization.
And someone asked me, like, well, what does that mean, decision advantage? And I said, well, have you ever used Google Maps or Waze? And they're like, yeah, that's decision advantage. You plot your course, it tells you there's a big, hold up on this highway. So take that highway around it. That's decision advantage.
It's a game changer. It really is. People should
Exactly.
think about everything they do in that term, and it'll
Yep,
just make them go, oh, okay, now I see.
exactly.
Well, what do you think has changed about today's risk landscape that makes the old way of operating harder to sustain? Why should people think about this future operations center?
I mean, the old model assumed that you could organize the defenses around these domains. And, for a long time that worked kind of well enough, especially like the cyber domain, right? But what's changed is, and I'm going to say changed and accelerating, is that these don't stay in their lanes anymore. Think about cyber now across the physical domain with, industrial control systems and OT. Think about disease, like we had COVID and stuff that impacted people and then people impacted facilities and you had this cascading, right? So this can start in one domain, but rarely stays there. And the AI and all these other things are just going to accelerate that in a very significant way because AI can manipulate people. It can also impact the systems. And the more we have AI, the more they can ultimately onward impact our internal systems.
Nothing is stagnant, so our defenses shouldn't be either. But if most organizations are still operating in silos, this old medieval way of doing things, what needs to change in how they structure and run their operations?
I guess the starting point is that if management doesn't fundamentally acknowledge that this is an operating model problem, not a technology problem, that's where the first stop is, right? If you can, then the concept that we're developing around this future operations center model, they can then see, oh, yeah, we do need a new model. Let's look at this. So that's like the first part of it. And the problem that you have when you talk about an future operations center in their mind, it's like, is that a bigger video wall? Is that more seats? It's like, no, it's a fundamentally a different way of working. So what we're calling joint operations. And I think this is really important. And this is something that I again learned from supporting the military that we have different disciplines. Like in the military, they have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, right? And Cyber Command, they maintain their discipline, they train around it, and they have their identity, they have their uniforms, they have a lot invested in that. But they constantly come together around a mission as a joint combined force where each discipline is adding value to that capability that's driving toward the objective of that mission. So that's what we're pulling together here. And what I've been using in my briefings and training is General McChrystal, Stanley McChrystal, developed during the Iraqi war. He had that big monolithic command and control system when they first came in there. And then they figured out, wait a minute, this enemy is agile, they're networked, they're decentralized, right? They're making decisions not through top down command and control. Each unit is essentially autonomous, right? And he said, we got to stop what we're doing and regroup. And that's when he came up with this team of teams model about 10 years ago, almost to the day. And so that's what we're talking about. Don't like break down people's silos. They don't like that, right? We're going to let them love their silo and be smart about being a business continuity professional. But when they come to the mission, they bring that skill and work with the others to make it more effective. So that's what I'm pushing and hopefully what needs to change.
Yeah, it makes sense. You get tremendous value from having these silos because they're really good at what they do, but the overall value to the organization is exponentially more when they come together. Think of like medical teams. You get doctors who are really good at their individual disciplines, but if someone comes in and no one quite knows what's going on, you bring them all together, they can figure it out as a team.
And I also look at it as a fabric as well, right? that when you bring those teams in, one, you get different perspectives, which makes the decision making smarter, right? They can see, related issues that can spill over, right? So you're seeing all of that in that combined, what I call shared consciousness, as an amazing human capability. And that's what we're trying to do here. And then the risks, they don't just end up in the cracks, right? And blind spots and gaps.
So it can work well in the military, it sounds like, and like the example I gave of medicine. But have you seen this approach play out effectively during a significant disruption in the corporate world or the civilian world?
Yes. In fact, I would argue most organizations, and probably anyone that's listening to this conversation, already has proof.
Hmm.
And in fact, their organization, wherever they've been, has instinctively understood and have implemented the model. And you have the same look that I get when I'm talking to a senior leadership team and I come in and say, what I'm about to tell you today, you already know, you already did. And they're like, well, why do we need you? Right.
Right. Yeah.
So when the organization was faced with an existential threat, COVID, the chief executive said, get me a task force, bring everybody together that can save this business, give them authority and tell them to execute. So literally overnight, boom, they had a team of teams.
Mm.
And most of the times they would have a organizing task force. And if they were, a large company, they would have regional task force manning facilities and people and temperature and vaccines and all the things that happen, right? So, you just have to focus on what you're trying to achieve. So getting that was how that worked. And I guess when people say, and I tell them that you already have done this, I would say the biggest mistake you made is you didn't institutionalize it.
Right.
So that's what I communicate to them. When I go in, I try to use that. I hope anybody listening will also use that says, look, we're just going to do what we did before and it worked great. But let's institutionalize it in a way that we can support not just one objective, which is save the business, but we have executive protection, supply chain, insider risk, all these elements that are all team of teams, all working under the same data umbrella and common understanding of the mission.
So when organizations try to bring different teams together, what tends to create the most internal friction?
Culture and language. Just like the word security at a meeting and someone says, go get security. Okay, well, you want the guy in the lobby? Like, what are you after?
What does that
No,
mean?
it's cybersecurity. I can't either. I can't.
Yeah.
So language matters, but it also matters in how if I'm going to collaborate with business continuity, or if I'm going to collaborate with cyber or whatever, if I don't respect and understand the nature of their work and some of the core language, I'm never going to bond with them, right? So that's, I guess, the big thing. Culture, of course, is one. When we tell people that they're going to be converged or you're going to break down their silos, right? That becomes very defensive about that. So I've reframed that around joint operations and all the things we've been talking about. But it's the other big point that I see, which is when you start talking about how people are going to come together and then they're fearful, are you going to move the boxes around? And this is happening like to so many CSOs I work with. It's like, oh, facilities, that now reports to you. Oh, business continuity. Oh, you can do that too, and then crisis management. Well, you have the EOC over here. Let's go put them under, and stuff just starts getting lumped in under that role or that position. And it's like, just because they want somebody to deal with all of this noise, but not thinking about it in a strategic way about why is there all that noise. So I have here 5 things that best organizations get that I've worked with to date. One is getting a shared operating picture, everybody looking at the same data. So we're going to see very personalized, role-based projection of that data and action taking with a little, AI support next to us, helping think about things and giving some alternative outputs. So that's that. The standardized playbooks and handoffs is so important. It's like racy. It's like who can make decisions, who has to be informed, who has accountability. So that needs to be understood in that environment. And this is like at the macro level, the human in the loop, when an agent, an AI agent's over here autonomously and saying, hey, I'm getting ready to shut down this production line. And you look at all the facts and say, yeah, go ahead and do that, versus the agent just going off and doing it. And then you're going, whoa, what happened here? And then the other key one, which is I think one of the hardest, is to get to an operational rhythm. And this is going to depend on the team and what their mission is. Some teams will have maybe a daily check-in. Some teams will have maybe once a week that they're bringing together to share information because it's a more slower moving. But then you're going to have a 24/7 operations center where those teams that are operating in a 24/7 environment will have continuous engagement in what we call the continuous risk management model. So threats come in, they're triaged and looked at from all protective disciplines to say, do we need to lean forward and prepare? And what is this threat in the sense of timeline? Is this like immediate, or can we kind of work on this? Or did I sense an incident that just happened? And then, okay, who needs to be organized to now respond, recover, and do the after action on this, right? So you have all of that going on in multidisciplinary teams, not just one team trying to hold up the whole organization and then finding out, help, I need the cyber guys, right?
Right.
So those are the what I would call the 5 key things that you have to work through to really get this to take hold.
Well, as organizations move toward this model, clearly it's going to cost money, it's going to cost resources and time, and executives have to be able to prove this out that it's worthwhile. So, what can leaders do to measure whether this approach is actually improving outcomes?
There's no question early on that the classic, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. The metrics I think that people will focus on are, operational things that they can communicate back to leadership, like time to detect. So maintaining that data, again, in this knowledge fabric that says, here was the first time we saw the signal. Here's when we actually reacted to that signal. So what does that look like? And then it would be like time to decide, okay, now we see it. What did we do about it? And why did we delay? Like, what were we missing that caused us to not act more quickly? I guess time to coordinate when this multifunctional environment, and then ultimately time to recover and things like reduction in duplicate effort. Where are you getting efficiencies by having people work together, both in systems and in processes and time, right? So that's what they're going to do. But I guess the critical thing for the business and getting to the obvious part of it will be, how effectively is this model getting, faster, reducing friction, but more importantly, containing business impact? Because that's going to be the ultimate pointy end of all of this, right? It's like, how effective are we at identifying threats, understanding how they may impact the organization, and neutralizing those threats before they manifest themselves, and keeping track of that, right?
And that's the key. Like, I think a
Right.
big takeaway from this is, I know it's a pain in the butt, but you got to track those metrics because metrics are what gets you budget.
And an interesting thing for people on that are, work in op centers, what you're actually doing is every threat that you process gets its own life. Think about it as like a computer process or a little agent now that owns this potential threat, right? And
Yeah.
then it's going to work it through that continuous risk management cycle until it's closed out. So if that threat becomes not relevant, that agent goes away. The next threat comes in, the agent sees it. Oh, it's relevant. And look, here's what the potential impact is. Oh, but all the mitigations and everything were good, drops away. And you can see that agent just keeps going through that process, and it's going to follow that through, and it's going to record all those actions. So you actually have very rich data about who and why and how long it took to respond to and act and hopefully recover from whatever ultimately makes it through that whole cycle.
That's a great way to look at it. And I think AI will absolutely help make that a whole lot easier. Yeah. Well, final question for you. If a team out there that's listening wants to make immediate progress in risk operations, where would you recommend they start?
So there's two sides to that. I can tell you one that's really critical and where I always start is where's leadership and where's the organizational culture right now, right? If leadership doesn't understand, especially in the context of what they did around COVID, that this is important and it makes sense and it's going to create the benefits not only internally, but also for external people that are dealing with the company, like regulatory people, the EOC, emergency response people that show up at your manufacturing plant. So it's external and internal. If they don't see that, then you're probably pushing a rope up the hill, right? And then from there, you want to kind of map out what are all the centers that we already have, right? So you can go in an efficiency conversation that says, look, if we start bringing all these together, we're going to be future ready for AI and we're going to actually be more efficient in what we're doing and we're going to cover gaps and blind spots. So you can play that out forward. And, we have a 30, 60, 90-day kind of work plan to say, you can put together a few people, get some stakeholders around that and start just working through it. And what we find is people are pretty grounded in it. It's not like you're bringing in some wild, crazy idea. It's like, no, we did this before. Here's how we're going to institutionalize it. And I guess I would just close in saying, and this, is very important, especially as people are inundated with AI, everything, and jobs are going to be at risk and all this stuff. It's like the organizations that are going to thrive aren't necessarily the ones with the most sophisticated technology. They're going to be the ones that have the strongest, deepest cross-functional relationships in the organization. That's what makes resilience happen. And if those relationships are maintained and through exercising and, of course, real world issues, you enhance and build those and strengthen those capabilities. So when anything comes to the organization, you're on it. You're working that all the time. And we're all focused on certainty management. Our job in the operational domain is to make sure, to the best of our ability, you can deliver on your value-generating business objectives with the greatest certainty.
Wise words indeed, and a fantastic way to wrap up. Bruce, thank you so much for being on the show. Really great information.
Thank you. It's great.
To learn more about Bruce and the Future Operations Center, click the links in the episode description. You can also watch the video highlights on Alert Media's YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to the Employee Safety Podcast from Alert Media, the world's leading provider of risk intelligence and response solutions. To learn more about how to protect your people in business during critical incidents, visit alertmedia.com.